SpunOut.ie ventured to Brussels and Strasbourg to find out more about the European Parliament, what it does and how it works. We talked to MEPs, NGOs and European Parliament staff about their thoughts and views on a range of different topics. In this video, we asked them how working at a European level differs from Ireland and how they relate the two in their day-to-day work.
Is it tough work to try and match up your kind of Irish interests with looking at things from a Europe-wide perspective? Or?
Yes, it is, because even though we're a small country, we're quite an old country, though, as part of the European institutions. You know, we joined in 1973-74. At that stage, Europe was 9 countries. Now it's 28 member states. But everyone has to be aware that, you know, we have mandates, and the mandate comes from the people of Dublin, in my case, so I'm very conscious of that and trying to defend my city, my county, to make sure that when it comes to the European decision-making, the views, as best I can understand them, are reflected in terms of the decisions that come out of Brussels. We're members of the European People's Party, which is the biggest parliamentary grouping within the European Parliament. It represents 221 of the 751. And that's important because it's a big group. It represents all the 28 member states. There are political families across those 28 member states. Some of them are in government, some of them are in opposition. Being a part of a big political family means you've got to work twice as hard, really, to make sure that Irish interests are understood, and also make alliances. I constantly make alliances with people, smaller countries that have things that we need to defend, that they want to defend as well. But you've got to be constantly thinking of the diplomatic side. What are the things you need to do to make sure that Ireland's interests are understood? Because it's the only directly elected institution of the 3 institutions in the European Union.
Well, you know, the two aren't all that different in certain ways. One is much bigger constituencies, but actually there is a lot of connection between local government and European legislation, for instance. It's hard though, you know, in terms of the resources you need. I have always at least 4 members of staff. It's a huge, I didn't have any staff as a councillor. I think that's a problem for a lot of councillors. You'll see them talking about it. I think resources to run in elections, if you're an independent, very, very hard.
It can be difficult. I think the water report was an example of that, because you're trying to write a report where, obviously I'm coming from a perspective where we don't agree with water charges. We don't think it's a progressive way. But you're dealing with countries that do have water charges and are quite happy about the fact that they have water charges. So you're trying to write a report to deal with all of these different issues and to take account for different policies in different countries. So that can be quite difficult, and it's about getting the right balance. And I suppose that reflects that, yes, you're coming from it from an Irish perspective, but for me, you also come from a left-wing perspective. We can be critical of the European Union. We think that where it makes sense to organise on a EU level, then we'll support it. But in other cases, we would argue that it should be the member states' decision.
Well, everything that I look at it from the point of view of how will it help humanity and how will it help the planet. And if we help humanity and we help the planet, well, people in Ireland are humanity. We do live on the planet and it will benefit us all. And the idea that we live in a world that isn't interconnected would be naive. While at the same time, I think connecting that world requires more negotiation and more talks between the people rather than a top-down approach. And an interesting thing was said by an MEP in the chamber there to Angela Merkel. You want to be careful with mixing up being strong with being overly dominant and telling people what to do. So the decisions and the conclusions that I come to hear, it impacts the whole world, of course, but my audience are the people in the 15 counties in Ireland that voted for me, and obviously I'm taking into account their views at the same time.
I work in aviation and shipping, and I come from a country that's incredibly dependent on aviation and shipping. There is that personal connection, but yeah, as you say, working for a European NGO, you have to look at these from a European perspective and even a global perspective, because these are international transport modes. And that's part of the appeal of the job, is seeing how it affects other European countries and what the impact is on a global level.
In Ireland, youth doesn't have the strength that it has in Europe. That was the thing that struck me when I was in Europe as a volunteer, how important youth and the youth voice is seen in terms of making policies. And I think kind of involuntarily I got more and more interested in European decision making and European policies, just because my voice was listened to a lot more than it was at the national level.
In Sweden, you automatically, the day you turn 18, you're automatically allowed to vote. So every time there's an election, you get a voting card. So you don't need to register in advance. It's then you choose yourself, of course, if you want to vote and who you vote for. So I think the Swedish system is fair enough. The Irish, I wouldn't recommend the Irish to any other states because it's too much administration, and I think it should be as easy as possible administratively to vote.
I suppose just for a comparison, a lot of people are familiar with the Dáil, and to get in and out of the Dáil in Dublin, you sign in at the door and someone has to bring you in. If you're a lobbyist in Brussels, you get a lobbyist pass, and that gives you free access to the entire building. So it's not unusual that a lobbyist would just knock on your office door and try to engage with you in lobbying.
I would have, for being an MEP, have got a budget for staff, which I just wouldn't have had in Dáil Éireann. And it means that I can get people to focus on areas like I never focused on before. Whereas in the Dáil, you can find a lot of the time as an independent, while you might focus on certain core issues, a lot of it is very skin deep what you know about a lot of different issues. Whereas over here, you can really mine it and you can really find out something about it.
We try as best we can across the policy areas to make sure that Ireland's view is represented. And how you discover that really is you have to work closely with the Irish government and with opinion formers in Ireland, with NGOs in Ireland, with Irish business, but come up with your own view ultimately. Even though I am a Fine Gael MEP, I am first and foremost an Irish MEP, and I don't take my instructions from Fine Gael. My instructions are taken what I see, the issues myself and the judgment calls I make. And one of the big differences between here and the Dáil is, in the Dáil we have 3-line whips where you have to follow the majority view of your parliamentary party, and if you don't, you're out of the parliamentary party, which is the old-fashioned Westminster system that we inherit from the British. Whereas over here, you've much more freedom to make your own mind up on things. So frequently, I voted against my Fine Gael colleagues, they've voted against me. There's much more independence. And I think that's really good because on issue by issue, you try to work out what you see to be the important issues and where we should stand. But because the issues are so vast, it's really important that we try to pick up as much opinion from home and coming to a decision on all these things.
It's really only when something negative happens that it comes up as an issue back home. There's a number of reasons for that, I think, and one of the biggest is that we're an island. That's a big issue, our geographical isolation. We tend to be that little bit stepped back. We tend to be that little bit different and that little bit isolated in Europe, and we see Europe as the big boys out there, and there's a lack of understanding for what the European Commission is, the separation between the European Commission and the European Council, the separation between them and the European Parliament, and the different roles that everybody has in this. So, and this is a particular problem for Ireland. It's a problem that we need to address. It's a problem we need to work on.